There are places that seem to breathe with the ghosts of power. Mansions that do not simply exist, they loom, watching, holding their breath as history folds and unfolds around them. On a hill above Caracas, beneath a sun that burns and a sky that never feels pure, stands one such house. It is vast, wrapped in iron and silence, its windows darkened even under daylight. To the outsider, it is just a mansion. But to those who have been close enough to hear what happens behind those walls, it is something else entirely. A living monument to control, fear, and unspoken authority. This is the story of Diosdado Cabello's mansion, a structure of marble and menace, where whispers replaced echoes, and where every corridor carried the weight of a country's secrets. It was not only a home, it was a fortress of influence, a center of shadow power that seemed to expand beyond its physical space. The mansion was the pulse of an empire of silence, born in the golden age of revolution, matured in secrecy, and sustained through fear. Everything inside it, from the chandelier's trembling light to the mirrored floors, seemed to observe, not reflect. Every sound, from the hum of an air conditioner to the muffled footsteps of guards, hinted at something deeper, something hidden. Outside, locals would speak of the mansion only in low voices, as if mentioning its name could summon its attention. And yet, it was not the building alone that held the story. It was what the walls saw. The meetings that shaped destinies, the wealth that entered through armored gates, the shadows that never left. Within its architecture lies the anatomy of a regime, the silent choreography of those who ruled through fear. This is not merely about politics or corruption. This is about a place where power was distilled into air so thick that anyone who entered it felt it pressing down, invisible but undeniable. The marble glistened, the hallways stretched endlessly, and in every reflection, whether on glass, water, or metal, power stared back at itself. As the years passed, the mansion became more than a residence. It became an organism, absorbing every lie, every secret transaction, every voice that trembled in its chambers. What began as a symbol of prestige evolved into something darker, a shrine built not to God, but to control itself. Tonight the gates remain closed, the guards have changed, the lights are fewer, but if you stand close enough, in the right wind, you might still hear it. The faint hum of conversations that shaped the destiny of a nation, now echoing through empty halls that refuse to forget. The terrible history of Diosdado Cabello's mansion is not carved in stone or written in books. It is embedded in silence, a silence so deep it has its own gravity. The mansion was built on the edge of a ridge overlooking the valley of Caracas, a structure of impossible geometry, heavy concrete softened by imported stone, surrounded by walls that climbed higher than the trees themselves. From a distance, it appeared like a citadel carved into the mountain. Up close, it was something colder, as if the earth had been forced to give birth to a palace against its will. The facade, bleached by years of sun, carried no ornament of joy. Only the long scars of humidity that crept down the walls, like veins running through pale marble. Inside, the air was unnaturally still. The temperature never changed, no matter the season. The scent was a mix of polished wood, expensive cigars, and the faint metallic trace of air conditioning filters that had run for decades. The entrance hall extended like a cathedral nave, a massive chandelier of crystal descending from the ceiling, dripping light onto a black and white floor so reflective it felt like stepping into a pool of ink. Each sound was amplified. Footsteps of guards on marble echoed for seconds before being swallowed by silence. When visitors were allowed in, their voices instinctively lowered. They felt watched, though they could not see by whom. Cameras were everywhere, embedded in columns, hidden behind mirrors, tucked inside the carved eyes of bronze busts that lined the walls. The mansion was more than a residence for Diosdado Cabello and his family. It was a command post. Beneath its polished surface ran an invisible network, communications rooms, armored tunnels, storage vaults whose contents were known only to a few. Behind one of the mirrored walls, There was a hidden elevator that descended into a chamber without windows, where the hum of generators drowned every word. This was where deals were whispered, decisions made, and fears confirmed. At night, the mansion changed character. Lights dimmed to amber, shadows lengthened across the marble, and the air felt heavier, charged with an invisible pressure. The guards' radios crackled quietly, and from the private quarters came faint music, boleros, or sometimes classical symphonies that echoed through the corridors like voices from another time. The family moved through it, as if the space belonged to another world, detached, rehearsed, weightless, in the middle of so much stillness. Outside the gates, Caracas pulsed with noise, protests, poverty, chaos. But inside the mansion, there was only the slow rhythm of ritual. Servants moved like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, their footsteps cushioned by imported rugs. The smell of leather and tobacco filled the study, where heavy drapes sealed out the sunlight. Every object was deliberate. Each painting, each sculpture, each relic chosen not for beauty but for symbolism. The faces in the portraits were not family ancestors but national icons, positioned to remind visitors of the weight of loyalty. And in the center of it all, Diosdado Cabello's desk, immense, mahogany, smooth as glass. On its surface, not a single paper out of place. From that point, power radiated outward, invisible yet tangible, reaching across the walls, the city, and the nation beyond. It was not the kind of authority built through law or tradition. It was power built through fear, bound to a space that demanded reverence. At dusk, when the city lights began to flicker below, the mansion glowed faintly, not with warmth, but with an austere, distant light, as if it were reflecting a sun that had already set. And as the wind passed through the trees surrounding the property, it carried whispers, the kind of sound that could be mistaken for leaves unless one listened too closely. The mansion did not rest. It remembered. Its silence was not absence. It was accumulation. Every voice that had once echoed in its corridors had been absorbed, stored in its walls like trapped air beneath the earth. And when night fell completely, the house seemed to exhale, a slow, quiet breath that made the chandeliers tremble ever so slightly. The mansion was not alive, but it was never dead either. By dawn, the mansion awoke before the sun. The mist that rolled down from the mountains of Caracas wrapped around its walls, softening its sharp lines for a brief hour before the light reclaimed its angles. The birds avoided its roof. Even the dogs from nearby estates would not bark in its direction. From the outside, the property looked calm. Silent gardens trimmed to perfection, fountains that no longer ran, a courtyard lined with statues that stared blindly into the fog. But beneath that silence, a hum persisted, electrical, constant, the vibration of a house that never truly slept. The mornings were marked by precision. At exactly 6, the outer gates opened, allowing a convoy of armored SUVs to enter. Each movement was practiced. Vehicles stopped in sequence, engines cut simultaneously. Men stepped out in formation. They wore suits, but their posture spoke of military training. The air was heavy with the smell of fuel and ozone. Doors opened, voices murmured, orders were given. Short, restrained, without emotion. Inside, servants had already prepared the rooms. The polished floors reflected the pale morning light like water. The air carried a faint scent of disinfectant and roses. The family's quarters were located in the mansion's eastern wing, a labyrinth of rooms adorned with European furniture and local craftsmanship. Here, luxury had no warmth. The curtains were drawn tight even during daylight. Portraits lined the hallways, their eyes painted to follow. In the main bedroom, massive windows overlooked the valley, but they remained sealed behind layers of glass and steel. Even in moments of quiet, the house whispered. The hum of electricity, the tick of distant machinery, the faint murmur of air ducts, all combined into a rhythm that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the man who ruled within it. The mornings often began with meetings. In a large room at the center of the house, The map room, as the staff called it. The table was covered not with maps of geography, but of influence. Names, companies, trade routes. Those who entered this room did so with a visible tension in their movements. The windows were blacked out, and 2 guards stood at opposite corners, motionless, observing everything. The discussions were brief but decisive, each word delivered like a blade. It was said that agreements made within those walls could alter the fate of entire regions, and it was also said that a single misstep in conversation could end a career, or a life. By noon, the mansion fell into a strange stillness. The sun poured over the property, but its light never seemed to penetrate the interior. The architecture was built for isolation. Thick walls, narrow windows, endless hallways that absorbed rather than reflected light. In some corners, the shadows never lifted. The smell of polished wood deepened with the heat, mixing with the faint trace of cigar smoke that seemed eternal, as if no window could ever purge it. The guards rotated, their movements synchronized to the minute. Outside, gardeners trimmed hedges that never seemed to grow. Inside, silence reigned like an unspoken law. There were rumors among the staff, stories of hidden rooms that appeared on no blueprint, of locked doors that led nowhere, of lights flickering in the basement long after the generators were shut down. Some spoke of voices at night, of footsteps echoing in empty hallways. None dared to investigate. To work in the mansion was to exist in constant awareness of being watched. The security cameras blinked from every angle, recording every motion, every whisper. It was said that even the walls had microphones, a claim neither proven nor denied. At dusk, a transformation occurred. The house darkened, but not because of the setting sun. Lights dimmed intentionally. Corridors glowed faintly in amber, creating pools of shadow between doorways. Somewhere deep within the structure, faint music played. An old tango, slow and mournful. The chandeliers glimmered like frozen rain. The air itself grew denser, heavier, as if the house exhaled its day's secrets only to inhale new ones. The city outside roared with life, but here, everything moved with deliberate slowness, like a ritual being repeated for the 1000th time. And then, there were the guests. Not many, never at once. They arrived in silence, always after dark, their cars without plates, their faces obscured by tinted windows. Inside, they were greeted without words and led through side corridors that curved like arteries toward the inner chambers. Conversations in those rooms were never recorded, yet the consequences of those meetings rippled across the country. The walls seemed to listen, absorbing every secret, every hesitation. And when the guests left, the air would tremble slightly, as if the house itself was sighing in relief. The family rarely appeared during these hours. They remained upstairs, behind locked doors, moving through their own routines, distant figures caught in the machinery of power. From the balconies, they could see the faint lights of Caracas, stretching endlessly into the horizon. But the city might as well have been another world. The mansion stood apart, insulated from the chaos it controlled. Power here did not roar, it whispered, and that whisper carried farther than any shout. As midnight approached, the fog returned, rolling up from the valley to embrace the mansion once again. The guards adjusted their rifles, the last vehicles disappeared beyond the gates, and the lights within the house faded one by one. Yet even in darkness, it did not rest. The hum continued, low and steady, a reminder that the house, and all it represented, was never truly still. In that quiet, one could almost believe the walls were breathing, remembering every deal, every betrayal, every promise whispered in the dark. The mansion stood not as a relic of history, but as a vessel of it. It contained the weight of power itself, sealed behind glass and stone. Power leaves its scent long after its owners are gone. By the third night of any given week, the mansion shifted into another rhythm, one not governed by daylight or human presence, but by the slow, deliberate heartbeat of secrecy. Rain swept across Caracas in diagonal sheets, striking the stone walls with hollow percussion. The sky above the estate was split by lightning that flashed white against the black silhouette of the building. In those brief, violent bursts of light, the mansion appeared almost sentient, every window a blind eye, every shadow a presence waiting to move. Inside, the rain became a whisper, softened by layers of marble and steel. The halls gleamed faintly under cold fluorescent light. In one of the lower wings, the generator room pulsed with mechanical noise, the sound of endurance, of machinery refusing to die. Water dripped rhythmically from a ventilation pipe, echoing down the corridor like a metronome marking the passage of something unseen. The air smelled of metal and oil, sharp and sterile, cutting through the distant trace of tobacco and wax. Beneath the mansion's grand staircase lay a narrow service corridor known only to the oldest members of the staff. It was lined with tiles that had long lost their color and smelled faintly of moisture and rust. Few dared to walk it alone. The corridor led to what many believed was an abandoned section, a cellar sealed off since the early construction years. But those who had ventured near it at night swore they heard faint murmurs behind the walls, as if conversations from decades ago had become trapped there, replaying endlessly. In truth, that underground wing was never empty. It was built with purpose, reinforced walls, isolated ventilation, and its own power grid. It was here that the mansion's true operations were said to take place. Hidden servers hummed in glass chambers, their blue lights flickering like constellations in the dark. Files, communications, transactions, the unseen nervous system of control ran beneath the very foundations of the house. To walk there was to step inside the skeleton of authority itself. Above ground, the family's life continued with choreographed detachment. Meals were served with precision. The dining hall, long and solemn, glowed beneath a row of chandeliers that never swayed. Conversations were quiet, polite, and brief, each word measured as though it carried weight beyond comprehension. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the loudest sound in the room. Outside the tall glass doors, rain streaked the windows, turning the city lights into trembling reflections. In the evenings, Diosdado Cabello would often retreat to his study. It was a chamber walled in dark wood and lined with shelves of documents rather than books. The air was thick, unmoving, illuminated by the dim light of a single desk lamp. From that space, messages were dictated, decisions approved, alliances maintained. Every phone call that began there would ripple outward through the corridors of government and the underworld alike. It was said that some of the most critical exchanges in Venezuelan history began not in palaces or offices, but in this silent, smoke-filled room. But the power that saturated the mansion came with a cost. One felt in the air, in the very tension of the walls. The staff lived in constant vigilance. They avoided certain hallways, never looked directly at certain portraits. Many believed the house carried an awareness of its own, that it remembered those who had left and those who never returned. Some maids refused to clean the lower floors after midnight. Others whispered that doors would close on their own, that music played faintly from rooms long unused. Outside, neighbors, those who still lived close enough, claimed to see lights flicker across the windows long after the family had left for their other properties. Some nights, the reflection of a single figure appeared on the balcony, unmoving, watching the valley below. It could have been a guard. It could have been a shadow. But in Caracas, even the wind seemed unwilling to question the mansion's mysteries. The building itself seemed to feed on secrecy. Every scandal, every rumor, every whisper of political maneuvering in the city seemed to strengthen its presence. As years passed, its legend grew darker. Tales of meetings that ended in disappearance, of fortunes exchanged in silence, of corridors that hid more than mere architecture. Historians would later speak of it as both symbol and symptom, the physical embodiment of an era where truth was buried beneath wealth and fear. And yet, beneath all of that grandeur, a slow decay had begun. The marble cracked in hidden corners, the gold trims dulled, the air grew heavier with the scent of damp stone. Nature itself was reclaiming what human ambition had forced upon the earth. The vines that once decorated the walls had begun to creep back, finding fractures in the concrete. But even in ruin, the mansion refused to yield. It stood proud, defiant, a monument not to glory, but to endurance through corruption. When the rain stopped, the silence returned sharper than before. The moon, veiled by clouds, cast a pale reflection across the wet terrace. From inside, faint music drifted upward once again, low, distant, like a memory fighting to be heard. Somewhere in the house, a light flickered, then went out. Only the hum of machines remained. The mansion was no longer just a place. It was a witness, to betrayal, to loyalty, to the slow erosion of both. Its walls held stories too heavy to speak, too dangerous to release. And so, they remained there, echoing beneath the marble floors, waiting for a listener who might never come. Morning broke with the kind of light that didn't illuminate. It revealed. It spread slowly across the hills of Caracas, pale and heavy, touching the mansion's facade with a sheen that made it look less like a home and more like a monument to something long gone. Dew collected on the iron gates like sweat, and the stone lions guarding the entrance glistened under the early sun, their expression unchanging, their eyes blind to the passing of time. The first sound to pierce the morning was mechanical, the groan of the gates sliding open. Inside, the hum of the generators resumed, filling the air with that familiar vibration, a reminder that even when the world slept, the mansion never truly stopped breathing. The estate's vast gardens stretched like a green ocean around the house, manicured into precision that bordered on unnatural. The grass was too short, the hedges too sharp, and the air too still. The scent of damp soil mixed with the faint metallic smell of the fences that enclosed it. The birds that occasionally crossed the perimeter didn't linger. Their songs never lasted long. Workers moved silently through the grounds, pruning, washing, maintaining. They didn't speak. They had learned that silence was the only sound permitted here. Inside, the rhythm of the day unfolded according to ritual. The family's breakfast was a ceremony of control. Fine china, polished silver, measured conversation. No laughter, no interruptions. Only the soft clatter of porcelain and the ticking of a clock that marked every second like a command. The children, pale under the glow of filtered light, rarely looked at one another. Their voices were low, rehearsed. Even the household's smallest gestures seemed choreographed, bound by an invisible law that dictated what could and could not be said. The staff watched from a distance, moving in perfect coordination to serve without being noticed. They were part of the architecture, silent mechanisms in the machinery of the house. The mansion was not ruled by chaos or impulse. It was ruled by order, by precision, by the absolute will of one man whose presence extended into every room, even when he wasn't there. The upper floors held the private quarters, vast spaces designed less for comfort and more for control. The master suite opened to a balcony overlooking the city, though the windows were often kept sealed. The curtains, heavy and dark, muffled sound and light alike. Inside, the walls were lined with portraits, not of family, but of moments. Photographs that captured handshakes, military parades, faces of men whose fates were now sealed in history. Each frame hung perfectly aligned, forming a silent gallery of alliances and power. Across the hall, another door remained locked at all times. Few knew what lay beyond it. The staff said it was a vault. Others whispered it was a private archive. But on quiet nights, a faint hum could be heard from behind that door. A mechanical pulse, rhythmic and deliberate, like a heartbeat made of wires. Those who worked close enough to hear it avoided the hallway altogether after sunset. At noon, the mansion's interior transformed once more. The light filtering through the curtains turned the air amber, and the temperature dropped slightly, as if the house itself rejected the heat. The study filled with smoke and voices. Visitors came and went, politicians, officers, financiers, each disappearing behind the same set of double doors. Their cars waited outside, engines idling, drivers staring straight ahead. Inside, the discussions were clipped and coded. No names spoken aloud, no words wasted. Every statement carried implication. Every silence carried threat. It was said that in those afternoons, the mansion became the unofficial parliament of power. Its marble floor the true foundation of decisions that never made it to paper. And when the meetings ended, the men emerged pale, their suits carrying the scent of tobacco and something else. Fear, perhaps, or reverence. As evening approached, the sky bled red behind the mountains, staining the mansion's white stone walls with fire. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of distant traffic, the city's heartbeat faint but present. Yet here, beyond the gates, time slowed again. The family withdrew to their quarters, and the servants vanished into their unseen spaces. Lights flickered on one by one, not in warmth, but in warning. Every illuminated window was a reminder. The house was awake. That night, a storm gathered over Caracas, and thunder rolled like cannon fire across the valley. The mansion absorbed each vibration, its foundations groaning under the force of nature. For a moment it felt alive, its windows shuddered, its walls trembled, but it did not break. Even the sky, it seemed, could not breach the silence within. Down in the underground wing, the servers continued to hum. Data moved invisibly through cables, information flowing faster than the wind outside. Screens flickered, their glow revealing faces of men and maps of regions, numbers scrolling endlessly in streams of code. In that hidden chamber, far from the gilded halls above, the mansion revealed its true soul. A network, not a home. A place where power was not merely held, it was processed, calculated, and preserved. And as the storm raged above, a single light flickered in the hallway. The shadows deepened. The hum grew louder. Somewhere in the darkness, a door clicked open on its own. No one moved to close it. The mansion stood still once again, surrounded by rain and silence, holding its breath between lightning strikes. Every flash of light revealed the same image. A fortress built not for living, but for remembering. The walls gleamed wet, the air pulsed with history, and in the distance thunder rolled like the echo of footsteps long gone. The mansion endures because power never truly dies. It only changes rooms. Years passed, seasons blurred. The city below the hill transformed, its lights dimmed, its sounds dulled, and its rhythm slowed under the weight of uncertainty. But the mansion remained. It stood like a shadow cast across time, its stone skin unchanged, its windows dark as ever. The world outside spoke of change, of decay, of rebellion and hope. But the house listened without reaction. It had seen too much to believe in renewal. It had stored too many secrets to forget. The gates no longer opened with the same precision. Weeds began to pierce the edges of the perfect lawn. The fountain stopped working. The guards, once statues of discipline, were replaced by younger men who no longer knew the rituals of silence. And yet, even as neglect crept in, the mansion's aura did not fade. It still exhaled that strange, oppressive presence, the weight of memory. Inside, dust began to collect on the marble floors. The chandeliers hung heavy with stillness. The portraits on the walls, those solemn witnesses to power, seemed to darken, their colors drained by time. Some rooms were sealed, others left open to echo. The air smelled of stone and abandonment, but beneath that, something lingered. The faint odor of tobacco, of ink, of metal, a residue of life that refused to leave. In the master suite, the curtains had not been drawn in years. Light filtered in like water through cracks, falling across furniture draped in white sheets. The bed, untouched, bore the indentation of a presence long departed. Papers lay stacked on the desk, yellowed and curling at the edges, their ink blurred by humidity. There were no documents of confession, no diaries of power. Only fragments, receipts, letters, photographs of faces that once smiled and later vanished. The silence was absolute, and yet it was not empty. The house seemed to vibrate faintly, as if its very foundations remembered the footsteps that had once crossed its floors. The staff that remained, only 2, perhaps 3, moved like echoes of a vanished world. They kept cleaning what no one would ever see, adjusting objects that would never be used again. They didn't stay at night. None of them did. Caracas changed beyond recognition. Governments shifted, allegiances dissolved, and names once spoken with fear faded into history's background noise. But the mansion endured, a fossil of another age. It became a rumor, a myth retold in whispers. Some said it was haunted. Others claimed it still served as a meeting point for unseen forces. At night, drivers passing the hill swore they saw lights moving inside, soft, bluish, like the glow of old machinery still running somewhere deep below the ground. Investigators came once, a small team, quiet, respectful. They entered through the main gates at dawn and stayed until dusk. When they emerged, their faces were pale, their steps hurried. They said little, only that the house was intact, though no one knew what that meant. The local papers wrote one short article, 2 paragraphs at most. Then silence again. The mansion withdrew from public consciousness as if swallowing its own name. Years later, vegetation reclaimed the outer gardens. The vines climbed the walls, wrapping around columns and choking the stone lions at the entrance. The iron gates rusted. Rainwater carved grooves into the courtyard, pooling in forgotten corners. The marble floors cracked under pressure from the earth below. Nature moved slowly but persistently, erasing perfection. And still, the house resisted total ruin. It was as if it refused to die, holding on to something invisible and indestructible, its own legend. At night, the wind carried strange harmonics through the broken windows. Some said it sounded like voices, like the murmur of those who had once stood in those rooms, making decisions that would shape the fate of millions. Others heard only the wind itself. But every listener agreed on one thing: the sound did not belong to the living. In its final years, the mansion became a place of pilgrimage for the curious and the brave. Documentarians, historians, thrill-seekers, they all came with cameras and microphones, hoping to capture the essence of what remained. They found only emptiness. But in that emptiness, they felt something. An energy so dense it made the air vibrate. Every footstep echoed too long. Every shadow seemed slightly delayed, as if reluctant to leave the walls. One filmmaker described it best in his notes. "It feels like walking through the afterlife of power." He wasn't wrong. The rooms, stripped of furniture, still carried the shape of memory. The grand staircase, cracked and fading, still commanded reverence. And deep beneath it all, in the sealed corridors below, the hum persisted. A faint, endless murmur, impossible to locate, impossible to silence. Whether it came from the machines that once sustained control, or from the house itself, no one could tell. But it was there, steady as a heartbeat. And so the mansion remains, silent, patient, waiting. It does not crumble completely. It does not vanish. It endures as every monument to secrecy must endure, not as ruin, but as warning. The rain falls, the earth shifts, the years pass, and still it stands on its lonely hill, overlooking a city that no longer remembers its master. At night, when the fog rises and the lights of Caracas flicker below, the mansion glows faintly again. Not from electricity, from memory, from everything it has seen and everything it refuses to let go. Power fades, but the walls that contained it remember forever.